Evening, everyone. I think we're good to start.
Cool.
Great stuff. I'd like to welcome everybody this evening to part 2 of our first online CF annual conference. We've a lovely evening lined up for you, so do stay with us throughout. We'll be here until approximately 8 o'clock or so, and we'll follow this evening's conference with an invitation to yoga, which hopefully you should have received by now if you registered before 3 o'clock yesterday. Today, our lineup includes Professor Luke O'Neill. He's a busy man, as you can imagine, and I caught up with him earlier in the week, so you can hear his words of wisdom this evening. We also have a research roundup. Research is hugely important and represents quite a substantial amount of where our fundraising goes to as part of CFI and our goals for each year. So we have a research roundup coming up this evening. We also have some information from Sam as part of our membership supports team. And we'll also have another group of guest speakers later on looking at pregnancy and all things related to being a parent with CF. So without further ado, we might have a look at our interview with Professor Luke O'Neill. Thanks, everybody. Hi, Professor. How are you?
Hi, Bridget. Not too bad. How's yourself?
I'm good, thanks. And I know that you are very well known and have popped up on media increasingly over the last 12 months, but I might just introduce you to everybody just in case people haven't come across you yet. So you're currently Chair of Biochemistry at TCD, and also you're linked in with the Biochemistry and Immunology School at TCD as well. So we're delighted to have you here in the midst of a busy schedule, and I imagine a busy 12 to 18 months so far. So it's lovely to have you this evening. We're hoping that you can just give us your thoughts on COVID, the story so far as such, and maybe a little bit about the legacy of COVID going forward. And we were very fortunate to have a webinar last week where we spoke with some of our own clinical teams, and Professor McAvaney from the RSI had a little word about specifically around CF and COVID. So we're delighted to hear your thoughts and reflections on the story as it stands at this stage. So I'll hand it over to you.
Very happy to give you my hope for my words of wisdom. We'll see what we make of it. Share my screen. Now, I'm very happy to give a brief talk and then take questions, because obviously we might have a fair few questions. I know Jerry McAvaney very well. I'm going to explain something about our own research actually that we did with Jerry. So it's nice to hear he's been contributing. I thought I'd give you kind of a general update on where we're at with COVID anyway, from a scientific point of view, and then talk about specific issues that might be relevant, I guess, and then, you know, the way out. And obviously at the moment, we're in a much better place when it comes to COVID, no question, because of this massive success of the vaccination campaign. I mean, it's a strikingly wonderful thing if you're an immunologist, because we now have 11 vaccines against this virus. All of them are highly efficacious and highly safe. We're getting great data from Israel, from the UK, where they're being used widely, you know, so there's massive grounds for optimism. I mean, I've always been of the view that science will beat this disease and get us out of it. And that's actually coming true through the vaccine campaign. I think of direct relevance to CF, though, by the way, is the stuff we're discovering in relation to COVID could have application outside COVID, any lung disease really, because obviously this is a lung-based respiratory illness. So of course, CF patients would have somewhat similar pathways actually are being dysregulated in CF as they are in COVID. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of that. That's quite exciting in many ways. So much of the work we do in my lab is around anti-inflammatories actually, and trying to develop new ones. Big collaboration with Jerry McAvaney, as I'll explain, with CF as well. So in other words, the work on COVID is important for cracking the COVID problem, if you will, but it will have application outside COVID, which is tremendous, I think, is one development. Vaccines, I mean, we could get vaccines for all kinds of things. Pseudomonas is of huge interest to CF patients, and you never know, there could be much better ways of treating infections in the lungs in other ways outside COVID. So there's a lot of excitement, I guess, is happening in the world of immunology that extends beyond COVID. But let me I'll start by giving you the update of where we're at. You all know by now, everybody's an immunologist, am I right? what it is and the basis of the immune response to it. There's the virus itself. People probably haven't seen necessarily a picture of it. This is magnified 30 million times. It's from the first patient who sadly died of COVID in America. They culture the virus from a biopsy, and it's a coronavirus. It has this spike-like structure. It forms a crown, hence the word corona, around the outside. So, and it is alarming to think what that virus has done to the world. I mean, we're saying it will go down in history as one of the worst pandemics, not because of the fatality rate. That was higher for things like 1918, the Spanish flu, but it has destroyed the world's economy, this virus. 1 in 3 people kept out of school. I mean, it's amazing. 40% under quarantine at one point. So again, it's the most amazing thing that's happened to us, isn't it, in many ways? But because the good news is all this research has now gone into it to help us resolve this particular problem. And I guess, as you all know as well by now, it's especially interesting as a virus. It is in the coronavirus family. Now, there are 6 other members of that family. This is the 7th member to infect our lungs, if you like. The first 4 were very benign. They just cause cold-like symptoms in your nose, and you don't even know you've had them. 1 in 5 colds are caused by one of these 4 coronaviruses. 2 more came along, SARS and MERS, that you may have heard of. They were more difficult. They would go deep into your lungs, cause very severe symptoms. MERS had a 35% mortality rate, for example. Now, the new one, though, is a bit like SARS and one of the ones that caused the cold had a baby, because it's got both traits. It can be a mild disease in some people, stays in your nose, doesn't get as far as your lungs. But the trouble is, mild disease spreads everywhere. And that's the single most difficult part of this virus, what we call asymptomatic transmission. People are walking around for 3 days with no symptoms, spreading this virus. And of course, they get over it. They don't even know they've had it. The worry is it infects someone who's vulnerable and they get severe disease. So the only way to control it then was a global lockdown, because you didn't know who was infected and who wasn't, and anybody could be spreading it. So that was the feature that really was one of the more difficult aspects of this virus. That was discovered in Germany, actually, about a year ago. Scientists began to first report this. Nobody believed them. SARS and MERS were easier, it turns out, because there was only symptomatic spread. So someone had symptoms and they were told to stay home, and that could decrease the spread of it. But this virus was able to spread with no symptoms, and that remains, I guess, one of the more troubling aspects of this disease. Now, the big question is, why would it progress then into a more severe disease? And a certain percent of people, it will go deep into the lungs and cause, tragically, death, as we all know, or very severe illness. And of course, age is the big predictor, which I'll come back to in a minute. The older you are, the worse disease will be, tragically. But secondly, a whole range of diseases puts you at high risk of severe disease. Heart disease is the big one. COPD, a lung disease, is a big one. And of course, for cystic fibrosis, the worry was that CF patients might be especially susceptible to severe disease. There seems to be good news here, and you would all know this, I would guess, more than me. And the Harvard Medical School issued this great thing recently. People with CF don't appear to be especially susceptible. And when they do get infected, they don't tend to get sicker based on data so far. Isn't that tremendous? So that's a lucky break, I guess, for CF patients in a way. Very good website, the CF Foundation in America. Actually, you probably know this yourselves as well. Very good Q&A on their website that explains some of this. So as far as CF is concerned, you aren't at a much higher risk. Now, clearly, there could be other comorbidities in there. CF patients are classified as a vulnerable group, and they're on the list to be vaccinated, as we just discussed, which is great. But I wouldn't be especially worried with this one necessarily, although again, caution as ever with any chronic disease will make it potentially more problematic. But in general terms, it doesn't seem to be linked into more severe disease, which is a good thing. I guess it's a work in progress, by the way. There may be some evidence against that, but it's just something to watch and not to be too concerned. Now, of course, one reason is the immune system is there to protect you. And CF patients have got a good immune response in general terms, broadly speaking. And the immune system will clear this virus. It's tremendous, and it kicks off very quickly. The blue line here is the virus going away as the immune system fights it. The green and the purple lines are your antibodies being made. And loads of antibodies get made, and they neutralize the virus. And they help the immune system clear it. And that's in 90% of people have this response. A big question we had was, will that immunity persist? And there's good evidence again there. The latest data would say 9 months out from infection, you are protected against reinfection, which is tremendous. So the immune system is, in general, seems to be doing its job against this virus, which is good news. Of course, in the ones who are vulnerable and the older people, what's happening there is the immune system often is inactive for some reason. And it can be because of age, various reasons, the immune system isn't as effective. And now the virus really takes off and begins to cause all this injury. And that's why you see severe disease in people. The other aspect of this, by the way, isn't just mortality. It's what we call long COVID, persistent symptoms. And that is a feature of this virus. And maybe 10% of people have long COVID. It's a very troubling aspect. Chronic disease can be very debilitating. We still don't know why that is. It's a bit of an unanswered question. You do see it in other viral infections called post-viral fatigue, for example. So it's something we're watching closely. Again, the news on that would be that it kind of resolves over a few months. Secondly, there's evidence the vaccine might relieve symptoms of long COVID. So again, that gives us a bit more information. Again, it's something that we're all very keen on following and examining very closely. Now, the other thing to say is, I mean, the amount of science that's gone on is remarkable. All over the world, scientists and drug companies and everybody began to work on this virus to stop it, basically. And we've 4 lines of defense against this virus. First and foremost, the vaccine, back to that in a minute. But secondly, antibodies themselves. Your immune system makes them. And of course, companies could now make antibodies as a therapy. They're very effective. 2 companies, Regeneron and Eli Lilly, have had their antibodies approved, and they will neutralize the virus. They can be used therapeutically. Antivirals, they're drugs that will directly kill the virus. One is called remdesivir, that's showing some benefits. Huge effort to make better antivirals actually underway. We never got a vaccine for HIV, remember. AIDS, we got antivirals. So again, that's a work in progress. And then fourthly, the anti-inflammatories, because this is an inflammatory disease of the lungs, and that's where my research comes in. And these are still important because not everybody's vaccinated, for example. Some people, the vaccine isn't as efficacious in. We still have loads of flu every winter, and even though there's a vaccine. So we still need these therapeutic approaches to help us treat this disease. And again, you'd all know this now. It's so common in the media. All these vaccines, I mean, it's tremendous. We've 3 vaccines approved, 4 actually. Let me get that right again. The 4th one, Johnson & Johnson, that was approved about 3 weeks ago. 4 vaccines approved, 100% efficacy at stopping severe disease and death. Isn't that tremendous? The different percentages are more to do with getting infected. In other words, some aren't as good at stopping infection. But in general terms, they're all very efficacious. Take any vaccine you're offered is the message here. It's a great triumph of biomedical sciences. More are coming, CureVac and Novavax. They're next in line. The Sputnik, the Russian vaccine, is coming as well. So we're in a wonderful position with these highly efficacious vaccines. Now it's just a question of getting them out and getting them into people's arms. And of course, there's an Irish connection with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Adrian Hill. I did work with him for years, actually, on malaria. He is in the Jenner that made this vaccine, Theresa Lamb, as a postdoc there. So great success story for Oxford. And AstraZeneca, of course, are the company that are deploying that vaccine. And as I say, 4 approved in Europe, 3 more to come, including Sputnik, the Russian vaccine. We'll have 7 vaccines by May, June, approved for use in Europe. The worries over the supply chain goes away because so many companies have these vaccines to give us, which is tremendous news, and it's something we needn't really worry about. We're still in the middle of it. I mean, we're still desperate to get as many people vaccinated as possible, and the reason is shown here. We knew these vaccines would make a difference. 99% of deaths and illness are people over 60, for example. Vaccinate that group, that number plummets. And this was modeled before the vaccines were even approved. The article Tim Cook in the UK, he said, if we vaccinate the top 4 priority groups, we will avert 90% of deaths with this virus, which is tremendous. I mean, let's face it, the power of the vaccines becomes very clear. And that's exactly what's happening. We've got great data now from Israel, where there's widespread use of this vaccine. This is the R0, the spread rate plummets post-vaccination. The virus stops spreading. We now know the Pfizer vaccine is stopping transmission between people. So all the signs are great. These vaccines are working. In the US, this was a healthcare worker trial where they gave healthcare workers the vaccine. And that's in Texas, where the virus is running rampant. Full protection against infection in healthcare workers. Ones who've been given 1 shot, it's less. Give the 2nd shot, it fully protects us. Tremendous. All this data. And of course, in Ireland, our Taoiseach himself is at 80%. Will be vaccinated by the end of June. Ursula von der Leyen in Europe was at 70% of citizens fully vaccinated in July. And of course, the vaccine means you can meet up. And the Taoiseach said 2 fully vaccinated people can meet up indoors with no restrictions. Here's a good slide. Any side effects? Yeah, the main one is you can meet your grandchildren and go back to some kind of regular life. That's the great side effect. That's a joke side. So the vaccines bring us tremendous hope, of course, to do for all these reasons. We're doing it by age. I know I learned just a few minutes ago that CF patients are on the list, which is great to get vaccinated sooner, which is really good. But it is going to be done by age, and that makes sense because it's an age-based disease. If you're in your 50s, you've 6-fold increased risk of dying than someone in their 30s. So it's really great that we have this campaign now to protect all our people. We're behind the UK. That annoys us, doesn't it? But we're catching up. As I say, in a couple of months, it'll be a different story entirely. 2 last quick things to mention. We are worried a little bit about these new variants. So there's new strains coming along, variants. Some the vaccine may not work as well against. We're still confident, though, that vaccines should work against these variants. You may get some illness from them because they're slightly more troublesome and the vaccine isn't quite as effective. But we're pretty confident that the vaccines will stop severe disease against these variants. But still, it's something to watch. It's something that we don't fully know, to be honest. There's the UK variant. There's a picture of it for you there. Now, lastly, I wanted to do 2 things for you. My own research, and this is directly relevant to CF, as you see. This is an inflammatory disease of the lungs, and let's face it, you're all more than familiar with that. And of course, we've got better at treating it. We can see increased survival rates in each age group between, say, April and June last year. We've seen an increase in survival rate. One drug, dexamethasone, an anti-inflammatory steroid. That's one reason for this. That's showing efficacy to protect people from COVID. The recovery trial in the UK revealed this. That dexamethasone was a great way to go after this. They've done 6 different trials at the moment and 2 drugs are working, which is brilliant. Now, our own work, I'm going to give you a little snapshot. We work on a molecule called Taconate. Now, Taconate is made by your own immune system to suppress inflammation. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It's also got antiviral properties. It was shown to work against Zika virus. And my labs are working on this. And directly relevant to CF patients, a great paper came out by a woman called Alice Prince, and she's a real expert on CF. Guess what Taconate does? It can target Pseudomonas. So we're very interested now in Taconate in the context of CF and Pseudomonas. It's a great way to modulate Pseudomonas infection. There's very interesting data coming out on that. And we haven't done stuff on CF yet with Taconate, but we have done COVID. This is a study we did in Belgium with our Belgian colleagues in Leuven. They infect hamsters with SARS-CoV-2. It's like an animal model of disease. These animals get very severe inflammation in their lungs from COVID. We gave them Taconate and we can protect the lungs. The dots here are different hamsters. The higher the score, the more inflammation. So all these hamsters in the middle here were infected. Our lungs got inflamed. Taconate were protected. So now we're very interested in Taconate as a way to treat inflammatory diseases of the lung, COVID being one. But of course, we may move on and do stuff on CF. And the other bit of that CF that's relevant is shown here. The inflammation in lungs in COVID is being driven by one inflammatory pathway called the inflammasome. See, that's a big long word, but that's driving some of the inflammation. So SARS-CoV-2 activates inflammasome. That drives inflammation in lungs, and that's a key part of COVID as well, and that was a recent review. And we see overactivation of the inflammasome in COVID patients. This is a study that was done in Brazil with our collaborators. That big green dot is overactive inflammasome, which is an inflammatory pathway in COVID patients. And look at this, me and Jerry, and mainly Jerry, my role was to have a chat to him in a pub when pubs used to be open. He's blocking NLRP3 and cystic fibrosis. He's got very nice evidence that targeting NLRP3 may be a new therapeutic approach for CF. And he's very keen now to pursue NLRP3 as a target in CF. And I'm showing you that because let's take COVID on the one hand, inflammatory lung disease, CF on the other, inflammatory lung disease. NLRP3 is common to both. We can now potentially treat both with an NLRP3 inhibitor. So again, this notion of working on COVID may translate into treatments for CF, which would be tremendous. And Jerry's very keen on this and he's pursuing this very aggressively. It's very interesting. So in other words, the CF part in some ways then is as follows. There isn't a huge amount of evidence for increased risk, but still you got to be careful. There'll be other comorbidities, and CF patients should be vaccinated as soon as possible. But secondly, inflammation in lungs, as applies to COVID, also applies to CF, and we may get therapies for CF from our work on COVID. So again, nice sort of, unintended consequences in some way from COVID-19 work. Lastly, remember, you can all help your immune systems. And of course, you would be well aware of this. There's all kinds of things you can do to provide benefit, to stop inflammation in the lungs, for instance, to boost the immune response, to fight infections. And they're all the obvious things. A good night's sleep is key. Good nutrients are very important. De-stress is extremely important because stress will turn off the immune system. Exercise is important. And all CF patients are very well aware of this. Stay as healthy as you can. Iron's important. I did a thing on this recently on COVID. Iron deficiency is really bad. That impairs the immune response to this virus. So make sure your iron levels are normal, really important. Vitamin D, you'll have all heard of this. Vitamin D is I'll tell you one thing, a great helper for all these immune cells. So again, make sure your vitamin D levels are up, and that's a great way to do it. And then I might finish just with where we're going. Now remember, natural immunity will still protect you. The immune system will allow you to fight, as I mentioned earlier, and defend yourself. So if you've got an infection against COVID, that should provide some protection anyway. But of course, the vaccine helps this tremendously, and all the evidence is there now that the vaccination campaign will protect us, which is tremendous. Therapies in hospitals, I mentioned already, they are getting better, dexamethasone and so on. So what this means is the fear begins to go away. And it goes away in two ways. It goes away in us as people, because we're all frightened, remember, we're still in the thick of it, we're not there yet. We're still getting our way through this, But these advances mean we can be less fearful. That's the first thing. Secondly, governments can be less fearful and begin to relax the restrictions. We all want to go back to the way it used to be. And that will be possible because of all these advances. We're taking baby steps because we're still in the thick of it. There's still people not vaccinated. There's still unknowns, these new variants, So we got to go cautiously and proceed slowly, but we will get there. And I've no doubt at all that when we get to the summer with mass vaccination, it'll make a huge difference to us and allow, many things to begin to return to the way they used to be. So bottom line is, we'll get through this together. Ireland's done a great job. We turned around the biggest spike in the world there in January. Look at that. Numbers are right down. So it's in our hands in many ways. And together, of course, we will beat this. We beat this by following the public health guidelines. We beat this by taking the vaccine when you're offered it. We beat this by working together to defeat this virus. And I've no doubt we're going to achieve that together. No matter what all the negative people say, we will make it through these different approaches. And my last slide is this. I'm going to answer a few questions now. If anybody asks me, are we there yet? I'll say no. This is Tony Fauci, the world's #1 immunologist. He's bringing us together, isn't he? And we're all in the car together. We're getting there. We're not there yet. So keep the ship steady and we will make it. And thank you very much for listening. And I'm happy now to take any of the questions that have come in.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Professor O'Neill. I think it was really upbeat and optimistic, which is lovely. I know that we are placing quite a lot of our eggs in one basket in relation to the vaccines, but I found it really interesting that there are so many other different therapeutic approaches that are in the pipeline and that are under development.
Yeah.
That's really encouraging as well. And I just found it fascinating the overlap between the inflammatory nature of
absolutely.
Yeah,
it's remarkable. I mean, we know a lot about CF. Remember, I mean, there have been new therapies and so on. It's an inflammatory condition. I've looked at the Pseudomonas. There's all these reasons why it's inflammatory. And the NLRP3 ones ago, and so I was working NLRP3 in the context of Parkinson's disease, actually, and Alzheimer's. And Jeremy said to me, oh, that's in CF, because he's seen it in CF patient samples. Let's try your inhibitor. And then we got that publication out. So most inflammatory diseases share common pathways, and CF is no different. So these advances we're making in the context of NLRP3 could apply to CF, for instance. So that's a really good, interesting parallel there, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it feels like we're grasping for every little silver lining we can get. I think.
They use anti-inflammatory steroids in severe exacerbations in CF anyway, so we knew dexamethasone would be used across the board in a way,
Absolutely. Something that I was thinking about when you showed the graph of the progress with the vaccines is that recent news that came out in relation to younger people. The parents are trying to keep kids well and, really in the hope that a vaccine might come sooner rather than later. What are your thoughts on the Pfizer data?
Great news yesterday on that. Fantastic. I mean, we knew that we probably were confident that it would work in children because that's normally the case anyway, but the data came out fantastic. In fact, it works great in children. It works better in children than people are older, So I've no doubt now we're going to get mass vaccination of children starting very soon. I mean, Pfizer are saying they're going to seek permission now to start in September in the US, vaccinating children. And that's a great result for us all, isn't it? Because remember, it's still a serious disease of children, even though it's much better in children. Children have a very low incidence of severity, of course they do. But still, 2% of children end up in hospital with this virus, remember, globally. So we need to vaccinate them just as much as anybody else.
Absolutely. I suppose as well, there seems to have been a lot less of the regular flu that we tend to have during our flu season. Have you any thoughts on how that has happened, or is that a feature of things to come?
No, we do. And that was first seen in Australia because they their winter ahead of us and there was no flu, you see. There was no flu in the hospitals anymore. And then we wonder, why would that be? Same in Ireland, almost zero flu. Now, there's two reasons. One is it's a respiratory disease, just like COVID. And all the masks and the hand washing and the distancing is helping block the spread of flu just as much as it would COVID. Travel is the second one because flu comes in from the outside. So we think it's a restriction in travel combined with the public health measures that we're all following have made sure that flu is almost minimal. And that means no trolleys in hospitals every winter. Remember, most of the reasons for trolleys in hospitals is flu. So I think in the future, we'll probably still be wearing masks every winter now because why wouldn't we?
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
Oh, yeah, but it makes sense, doesn't it, in a way?
Absolutely, the hand sanitizing and the masks and everything.
Just in the winter time, just in the winter.
Absolutely. There was one other thing I was thinking about, and it was, oh, it's just gone out of my mind.
Yeah.
I had a few questions lined up. There was one I was thinking about, which was to do with really just looking at where you think we'll be. You're so optimistic about the summer. That's what I was thinking. You were saying like really 6 months from now things will be great, but I suppose people are so anxious to get back to grandchildren and grandparents and all of those things. What do you think is on the horizon maybe in 12 months' time? What do you think?
Oh, we can be reasonably confident in our predictions, particularly because of the vaccine efficacy. I mean, there was some uncertainty because we weren't sure the vaccines would be that great in the real world. The trials were good. Okay, it's like jumping fences. So the first fence to jump was getting a vaccine that works. We had that by November, and that gave us all relief because there was a chance they wouldn't work. And in fact, Sanofi and Merck failed in their vaccines.
Yeah.
So we got there. That was great. The next question then becomes, will it work in the real world? It's one thing. A trial is one thing. Once you're out in the real world, it can be different. Great data from Israel, and now we know, fantastic. So now we can begin to predict. And as I said on the graph I showed you, we know if we protect the vulnerable, the death rate plummets and the hospitalization rate goes back to normal. That's going to be the case in June, July. Watch, if we're lucky. Now again, what might go wrong? Supply chain issues have been bugging us, but the fact there's more than one vaccine helps with that. Secondly, of course, these new variants I mentioned, they are a little niggle, but let's hope what I said is going to be borne out in the data that we will see protection with the vaccines against those. So once we get to June, July, you've got to reopen, Now they'll do it in a measured way until, just to be on the safe side. So certainly I would predict, whether the Taoiseach is laid out in front of us. I mean, we're going to see reopening of hairdressers by the end of May. Let's take that as an example. Now, the other bigger things, like will we see crowds gathering? I can certainly see 5,000-10,000 people going to a sporting event as we get to the autumn, those kinds of numbers. Now, the worry then would be in the autumn and the winter, it begins to go up again because we're back indoors. And we know the virus loves being indoors. That's happened in December, So again, there's a slight worry about a spike emerging in the winter. But if we get mass vaccination, of course, that'll lower the risk of illness, you see. So we can certainly this time next year, I'd be almost certain that we'll be 90% of where we were before this even began, like that kind of level. Like weddings, you might allow 50 or 100 people. Won't be fully. We're not talking about like a Viva Stadium full of people in a year. We'll still be a little bit cautious, And the reason we're beaten up, I mean, we're all a bit hesitant, So it'll be interesting to see what happens and it's right to be a bit reluctant. See, the worst thing in the world would be to let people die when the cavalry are coming. I mean, we can see them. We're all in the fort still. The cavalry are just about it. If we let people die now, that'd be the tragedy, wouldn't it? So it's like there's good reason for this caution.
Yeah, I think it's just it's really hopeful, and I think your very first words have been borne out that science has really helped us find a way out of it, really, hasn't it?
Yep, hugely, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, and thanks for giving us all your words of wonder, and hopefully we can catch up with you again in the future.
Very good. Thanks so much, Tricia, and all the best for the rest of the conference. I'm sure it'll be great.
Thanks.
And that was lovely Professor Luke O'Neill that I got a chance to speak to earlier this week. It was just so uplifting, and I think, you know, it's great to see that slowly but surely people are receiving their vaccination. If we had a magic wand, we'd have everybody done tomorrow, but you know, we're doing all the things that we know we need to do to keep safe in the meantime, and holding firm. And it was great at our vaccine webinar last week to hear Professor McElvaney talking about overall, people with CF have had, you know, they've come through when they've caught COVID, they've come through, and some have had some complications, but it wasn't the absolute fright that we thought it might have been.